Hello and welcome to this demo on dynamic unified targets. In this demo, we'll build an automation which will update the status of each work item extracted from open to complete. While doing so, we'll focus on how we can configure the descriptor to correctly identify work item while updating its status. Excited? Okay. We'll start with an existing workflow, which will log into the Acme website and access the work item page. Before we continue building automation, let's run this workflow to log into the Acme website. We're logged into Acme website. We're on the work item page. Our use case is to update work item statuses. To update the statuses, we need the details of WIIDs, so let's make use of the table extraction wizard to extract the details of work items. Let's click the Add Data button to start extraction and indicate the WIID column. Table Extraction Wizard identified that data is already in the table format. Hence, let's confirm if we want the details from only one column or all the columns. Let's capture all the details. So, let's click Yes. We're good with our selection. Let's click Save. But we see a pop-up warning here. You might wonder what went wrong. Don't worry. It's because the data is spanning across multiple pages. We can see here that we have not indicated the next page link to access the next page, so it's giving us the notification to indicate the link to access the next page if we've forgotten. But for this demo, we want the details of only the first page. We're good here. Let's click Continue. The output of this activity is a data table. We're aware of best practices for renaming data table variables. They must be prefixed with DT. Let's follow the same here. Let's rename this activity. We're just interested in the extract table data activity. So let's move this activity inside an already existing container and remove the use application/browser activity generated because of the table extraction wizard. Next, let's add filter data table activity. We want to only work items with open status and set it for DT_work item. Let's configure the criteria to filter the data. The column status is equal to open. Let's click OK. We'll save the filtered WIID's details to a different data table. So let's create a new variable. Now, we've extracted data. It's time to add activities to update the status of each work item. We need to update all the WIIDs in the filtered data table. Let's add for each row activity and rename it. We'll configure this activity to iterate through all the data in the DT_filtered data table. Now, let's add a getRowItem activity. We know that getRowItem helps in retrieving a value from a row in a data table according to a specified column. Let's set row as currentRowIterator. And we're interested in the WIID column's details. So let's select a name and provide the name of the column here, which is WIID. Let's save the retrieved value to a variable called workItemID. Here comes the main part of using variables in Descriptor. Descriptors allow easy identification of target elements based on the value of the variable or argument and not an exact string, which might change. The variable can be changed to interact with a different element without changing the descriptor. As variable/argument's value gets updated dynamically, new descriptors will get generated. In our case here, we need to click the respective search icon to update the work item status to complete. But as we see here, all the search icons are the same, and these icons don't have unique names to refer to while indicating. Let's use WIID as reference to identify the respective search icon to click. And one more thing to note here. When data is stored in a structured way, we can easily refer to them based on their position value, like index variables. As we're aware that our data here is in table format, we can access each search icon based on their numerical position. First, let's add a get attribute activity to get the row index of each WIID. Get attribute activity retrieves the value of a specified attribute of the indicated UI element. We can indicate any item in the work item ID column. Let's indicate the first one. Let's have a look at the descriptor. Here we can see it is taking WIID as text, and if we confirm without editing, our automation will work only for this WIID. So, we need to fine-tune the descriptor here. The fuzzy selector field supports the variable and argument. There are different ways to use variables in descriptor. We can create or use existing variables from the context menu. We can also select a part of the selector or fuzzy selector and use the context menu to directly convert it into a variable that's pre-populated with our selection. We already have the variable work item ID, which holds the value of the current WIID. Let's use the work item ID variable here in the fuzzy selector. We'll select the text in the text field and right-click and select the variable work item ID. We're good with our selection, so let's confirm it and disable the image targeting method. We want to retrieve the table row value for each WIID. Let's select the table row attribute and save this value to the table row variable. Next, let's add a click activity and indicate the search icon button. As we can see, our selection has identified duplicates. Now we need to fine-tune this descriptor further to make it work for all the WIIDs in the filtered data table. This time, let's adjust the selector instead of the fuzzy selector. Let's disable the fuzzy selector and enable the selector. Access the UI Explorer. Let's disable the CSS selector, mainly as it's not recommended to use the CSS from an element as a way to differentiate an element from another. Also, multiple elements can have the same CSS selector. And let's enable the table row attribute. Let's click Validate. It looks good. Click Save and return to the selection window. As we can notice here in the selector, the indicated WIID position is at row number 2. Let's select the number 2 and press Ctrl+K and choose the table row variable, and press Enter from our keyboard. We have adjusted the selector with table row variable to make it work for all the WIIDs in the filtered data table, so we're good with our selection. Let's confirm our selection. Now, we need to add activities to update the status of each WIIDs. Let's add a click activity and indicate the Update Work Item button. Next, let's add a Type Into activity and indicate the Add Comments input field. Confirm our selection. Now let's enter text here as completed. Let's add click activity and indicate the new status field. Before we move further, we're aware that when we click an Update Work Item, it opens in the new instance of the browser. So let's add Use Application/Browser activity soon after the Click Update Work Item button activity and indicate the Update Work Item page. As we know, each time page URL will change based on the work item ID. So let's adjust the URL to make it work for all the WIIDs. So let's add the variable work item ID variable instead of the actual WIID. Let's move these activities below in this container. Now, let's add a click activity and indicate the status option completed. Let's add one more. Click Activity and indicate the Update Work Item button. Finally, let's add another click activity to press Enter and to acknowledge the pop message generated for successful updating of the status. When work item status is updated, we need to go back to the work item page to process the remaining work items. So, let's add GoToURL activity and provide the URL for work item page. Okay, we added all the necessary activities for our use case. Before we run this workflow, let's log out from the Acme website and close the page. Now let's run the workflow. Robot logged into the Acme website, accessed the work item page, retrieved the data from the first page. As expected, it has clicked on the first work item and updated the status. It has updated the second WIID. All the WIIDs are updated. So the dynamic unified targets that we created earlier work perfectly. We have reached the end of this demo. Let's have a quick recap. In this demo, we have fine-tuned the descriptors to change the status of each item in the series. We've explored how, when the situation requires it, we can retrieve an attribute from a UI element and use that to build an automation logic. Also, we added variables in a fuzzy selector and selector, namely work item ID and table row. In turn, these variables made the selector and fuzzy selector dynamic targets and helped to click the corresponding search icon to update the status. Here's the challenge for you. Can you build the automation for the same use case as discussed without using the Get attribute activity? Thank you for watching and happy automation!